FBA BIPs with Dr. Rose Ivanone. I am going to start with a couple of polls just to find out a little bit about you guys. The first one is, what district are you from? So if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us. Oops. Great. Thank you guys so much. And I am going to turn it over to Rose.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Some of you I may know, and some of you may be new to me, or I could be new to you. So if I know you, hello. Nice to see you or hear you. So we're going to talk about how to evaluate the quality of your FBA and BIPs. And we're going to give you an actual instrument to do that. And we will actually practice about 3 items today with a fake FBA BIP that's been developed. Adapted from a district, but definitely cleansed, so hopefully the district would never know that it was their FBA BIP, and it's probably a combination of several. So today what we're going to do is talk about what are the components that should be included in a high quality FBA BIP, and then talk about the actual technical adequacy evaluation tool, try scoring it with a couple of things, and then talk about how to use in your settings. And I do have a couple of questions within this presentation, so you can definitely put in a lot of stuff in the chat box. I'll give you a lot of opportunities to use that chat box. So we're going to go over a little bit about FBA BIPs, the history of it. I'm going to assume for this training that all of you know what an FBA BIP is, and you don't need to be trained in FBA BIPs. So we already know that there is substantial evidence that FBA and BIPs are the gold standard for addressing individual behavioral concerns for individual students. And we have more than 20 years worth of research on FBA and BIPs. What we do also know is that it is not being implemented in the way it was intended to be in schools. And a lot of that is because there's either systems issues that are presenting it and or skill issues. Even though schools have done a nice job of making beautiful forms for educators to use that will help them and guide them to do FBA and BIPs in school settings, unfortunately, the form itself, unless the person completing the form does have the skill level to understand what that form is asking, what each of those items actually mean, has that behavioral science knowledge of FBA BIP processes. Sometimes those forms get completed with information that doesn't even look like what we would expect from an FBA BIP. The other issue is we probably are just starting now to look at how does the FBA BIP process that was originally developed more for clinical settings when it was first being evaluated, but now it's being used in school settings quite frequently, is how do we manage to make it fit in the schools? Like, what is the context in which FBA BIPs can do best in schools, and what kind of things can we maybe balance and shape up in FBA BIP so that they're more willing to be implemented in schools with higher fidelity? So we'd like to be able to move it to that last bullet point where it's actually used as originally intended. I always call it the original problem-solving process, because it does have some of those 4 steps, which is identifying the behaviors of concern and operationalizing them, and then analyzing the problem, and then developing an intervention to hopefully come up with solutions, evaluating how that intervention worked, and then going on to your next steps. And that's what we'd like to see this as being used as a tool in your multi-tiered system of supports. Now, we're not blaming schools for the problems they're having because we think we know why. There's a lot of problems. We don't necessarily know how to fix all of the problems that are there, but we do know schools have been kind of left up to themselves on deciding what is an FBA BIP. To date, there still are no systematic policies or systemic policies that have been developed either by the feds, by the state. So it's left up to the districts to figure out who does the FBA BIPs, what are the components we're going to do, how should we do them, What is the process going to be? What Scott and all have seen that schools primarily use FBA, BIPs for, as opposed to the problem-solving process in their development of how we're going to do it, is sometimes they're used as a reactive process. I work across several states to do FBA, BIPs and help them to try to improve them. And it is amazing how different districts look similar across the United States, but also there's some unique things. So, for example, I've not heard this in a Florida school, so I kind of think maybe we're a little better in this one area. But in another state, I worked with a group, and we were trying to find cases for them to practice this other FBA BIP process that we've done substantial research on, called Prevent, Teach, Reinforce. Some of you know of it. And the school psychologist was having a hard time finding a case because in their particular school district, they only do an FBA BIP as a last resort. And those were her exact words. And I said, so is that a policy? She said, that's the policy of our district. So they're using it almost as that reactive process. This is something we do when we think we've exhausted everything and we're ready to change the student's placement to either be, if they're in special ed, a more restricted placement, or for other kids, it may be the entry to get into special ed. So that is not the intent. Waiting until its behavior gets so chronic and so severe that it's going to be tougher to address, it's not the best practice that we know of. The other flaw is often it's not a very collaborative model. Even though there's a team sitting around the table, it could be one person is doing all the writing and filling in of the forms. It could be that person has also completed the forms before he or she has even come to the meeting, and so everybody is just agreeing or signing the forms. We also have some districts who may contract out to experts, such as behavior analysts, who will come with a 40-page narrative that no one could feasibly accomplish unless you were that behavior analyst and you had nothing else to do other than that one behavior plan. So we know that that doesn't work quite so well with teachers when there's not a lot of input into what's feasible and possible, which leads us to that third one, is those rigid, rigorous procedures that we have used in the past in clinical settings are not the procedures that will work feasibly in school settings. So this combination of things have resulted in what we have now. And I love this quote. Schools have implemented, in this last bullet, a variety of inexact practices and procedures that have been loosely labeled as FBA, the majority of which are not tied to any evidence base. Tell me, so this is our first chat. What makes it challenging for you, for your districts and your schools that you're in, to do really good FBA BIPs? What are we mentioned a couple of things in the slides, but there might be some things you're going to agree with and some things you're going to say, no, this is really why it's hard in ours. It'd be interesting to share.
Time constraints.
Yes, we hear time constraints all the time, especially in secondary settings. They say do it with fidelity. Yeah, because teachers are overwhelmed. Collaborating there again, the resources, finding the time. Thank you. Yeah, the time issue is always going to be a challenge, I think, for most school districts in doing any evidence-based practice, right? We often have so many things that teachers and principals and district administrators have to balance, from what comes down from Tallahassee, that comes down from the feds, that come from your superintendents. And sometimes it's a wonder that any kids come out and actually learn anything, because it seems like there's a lot of time spent in doing more administrative stuff as opposed to instructional stuff. And unfortunately, I don't know how to change that. However, we want to think creatively if there's a way to do so, because spending time doing practices that are not evidence-based or doing practices without fidelity is a very inefficient use of the time. So if you're filling out paperwork, like a paper FBA, BIP, and that takes an hour for a meeting, but nothing happens as a result, that hour is actually even more of a strain on your resources, because not only have you spent an hour doing something like that, you now don't have an effective outcome. So you can't have efficiency without efficacy. That's one of the very prime things to keep on telling yourself, and maybe to also keep on telling people who are reluctant to support people, that efficient and fast without effectiveness means you're not efficient. So it would be nice if we could all creatively come up with some ideas. I'm not going to put any of you on the spot to think of any today, because that's not the purpose today. There have been 3 studies. Before I came into this, I'm working on writing up our study on what we have found in our evaluation of FBA BIPs using this instrument I'm going to show you today called the TAPE, the Technical Adequacy Tool for Evaluation. We're interested because these studies were all done about a decade ago, and you would think we have some better outcomes after a whole 10 years plus of maybe improving FBA BIP practices. If any of you would like to have these articles but have no access to them, just contact me and I will send you the articles. But there were 3 really good ones that all came around the same time, between 2005 and 2007. All 3 did very similar things. They evaluated FBA and BIPs that were completed by school personnel and determined whether or not they were actually valid and technically adequate FBA BIPs. What's interesting is they're all in different states and different regions of the United States. They all used very different instruments to do the evaluations, but they all came up with the exact same themes. And these are just some of the themes that they all agreed upon. They didn't see much input. So one of you said about the collaboration and time for collaboration, limited input from the teachers and others. I do have to tell you, I once went to an FBA BIP meeting and the teacher was not present at the meeting. And when I asked where was the teacher, the response was, well, this is instructional time, and the teacher is not allowed to leave the classroom for meetings when it's instructional time. And my concern was, well, how can we do a functional behavior assessment meeting if the person at the school who knows the student the best of all is not present, and the person who has to do the interventions is not present? How will we get buy-in? How will we know it's feasible? They went ahead, they said, well, this is how we do it, so we did it, and we could not complete the FBA because the questions could not be answered by the team members who were there. So again, that's that they thought they were being efficient, yet we ended up spending an hour without any outcome because we didn't have the teacher there. So that could be one of the reasons we get limited input from teachers and others. And you can always chat in there. You don't want to. Nothing will leave this room. We can clean the chat before we leave the room at the end, and so no one will ever be able to say, "Oh, that district, somebody in that district said this," because I know you don't want to get in trouble. The other thing is the behaviors that are the focus of the FBA. And then the behavior intervention plan. It's very important to identify precisely what is that behavior and be able to define it in both measurable and observable terms. What these 3 researchers found out is often the behaviors were missing, or if they were there, they were poorly defined. The hypotheses, which is the primary outcome you get from the functional behavior assessment, is being able to tie together all of your FBA information to come up with what are the triggers of that behavior, what are the outcomes and the functions that serve the student when they perform the behavior. They found those hypotheses were flawed, had some problems. Sometimes what they try to do is they have several behaviors listed, but they do one group FBA BIP for 3 or 4 behaviors combined, and then try to assign one hypothesis for all of these behaviors, when indeed some of these behaviors may have different triggers and some of the behaviors may have different functions. The next one, behavior intervention strategies weren't linked with the hypothesis statement. So the whole reason you do the FBA is to understand the behavior better in a functional way. You're trying to understand and predict when does behavior happen. And by predicting that and seeing how people respond after the student does their behavior, you're able to figure out what is the student getting out of the behavior. Are they trying to escape, avoid, or delay, or terminate an activity, a person, some input, object? Or are they trying to obtain access, a specific activity, a specific person's attention, a specific object, or some specific input? When you have a hypothesis that summarizes this, but yet you don't use any of that to then develop an intervention that addresses those areas of the hypothesis, you kind of did an FBA for, a wasted purpose. What they are finding in their studies that most of the interventions were lists and names of strategies that had nothing to do with the hypothesis. Van Acker said that the predominant type of behavior intervention plan they found was this very hierarchical list that were like a drop-down list, so a stock list of possible positive and negative consequences that follow problem behavior. So then you have interventions that follow problem behavior, but they don't have anything to prevent or anything to replace or teach. Indeed, and then the next one is 46% of the FBA BIPs that Van Acker reviewed only included strategies that were aversive. There were no replacement behaviors to be taught. And then finally, another theme that was seen is there's a lack of follow-up. So they have this behavior intervention plan, but we don't know what happens afterwards based on looking at the documents or talking with teachers, because a couple of them followed up with interviews with teachers. We don't know when they're going to collect data, how they're going to collect data, when they're going to meet again. Is the teacher going to be supported in doing this intervention? Will there be a fidelity measurement? So think about the FBA BIPs you've seen in your district and school. If you were going to evaluate their technical adequacy, and I know you haven't seen the tape yet, but just think about them, because I'm sure you're at this chat because you want to hopefully think of ways to improve your FBA BIPs. What kind of themes do you think you'd see? And again, we will not be sharing this with anybody.
And I just wanted to let Gina know that the first handout that you see, the one that says Tate PDF, that is actually a copy of the PowerPoint. So if you download that document, you will see the PowerPoint.
Thank you. Yeah, I see that you just, okay, good, yeah. So if anybody has a problem with that, let me know. So go ahead and just think about, if you've seen an FBA BIP recently, what might you see? Like you might even see a good theme in your district. So it doesn't have to just be a bad theme. We're talking about strengths as well as challenges, but we tend to focus on what do we need to improve. But what are some things that are great that you've seen in your FBA BIPs? And what are some things you hope to see that you could help your district improve? Behavioral principle experience. Primary behavior is not always targeted. Thank you. Yeah, lack of fidelity checks and evaluating, did this work? Great, thank you, Gina. Okay. And Gina, are you in Pasco? Is there any other one? Okay, and there were a couple of others. I was just trying to see if, thank you, Gina. Okay. So if you could continue to put chat in, because we'll look back over it if we need to. Okay, I like this. Somebody said, Lisa, people are becoming better at defining target behaviors. Good. That is excellent, because the better that it's defined, the better chance that we are of developing some good interventions. Okay, the detailed steps. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So now we're going to go into our tool. Make sure you download all the tools. So the PDF is the actual PowerPoint. This is the next thing that you might want to pull up. This one, which is called the FBA BIP Tate, November. Because it has a date on it. That's why. It's the last time we did a little change in it. That is going to be the actual evaluation tool. And then the next one is called the FBA BIP Tate rubric. You're going to want to download that as well, because that's going to provide you with a description and a guide for how to score each item. So that tool that you're probably pulling up right now or downloading right now, we wanted to come up with a way that, taking from those 3 research articles that we talked about, we looked at some of their evaluation guides. And of course, you know how we are. We always think we can improve on somebody else's work, but we don't want to start over from the beginning. But let's say, we want to do something better. So what we wanted to do, though, is we really had a goal of coming up with something that school districts could learn to evaluate and use so that they wouldn't have to depend on USF to come out and do it for them. So we try to come up with a very district-friendly tool, and this will help districts or campuses or schools or even individuals, if we're coaching someone to learn how to implement FBA BIPs or facilitate them and then see how, if they continue to improve, it can be used as a baseline and a post and continuous progress monitoring tool for an individual person. So this can establish baseline progress monitoring for a district and also provide you information for what are your professional development needs in improving Tier 3. That Lisa did a really nice job of saying they have determined they have figured out how to identify and define the behaviors. They need some more professional development on how to define and describe teaching replacement behaviors. Remember, professional development doesn't mean a PowerPoint. Professional development in some of this could actually be coaching, which is one of the best ways, I think, to increase people's skills in FBA and BIPs. And then it also can provide you, if you're working on bigger work like systems work, and you're looking at Tier 3 improvement, one of the things that you can address in looking at Tier 3 behavioral supports as a system is improving your overall district's FBA BIP so that they're more technically adequate. So the way we got this tool is Kathy Christensen, who's one of the the PBIS technical assistance specialists, or whatever the rest of the name is, and I and Don Kincaid also, through three of us, after we did Prevent, Teach, Reinforce, realized that people like PTR and wanted to know more about it. And we wanted to be able to come up with a way to evaluate how well FBA BIPs were in schools and so that they could continue to improve. So we come to research for what people said should be on an FBA BIP. We got it down to 20 items and we sent it out to do what's called a content analysis. Content validity. So we sent it out to 3 experts and asked them if the item was essential and if the item was well written and it was clear enough so that a practitioner could understand it. After their feedback, we got rid of a couple of items and combined some. And so now the final tool that you have that's been in existence for a good 5 or 6 years has 18 items. 9 are addressing the functional behavior assessment part and 9 address the behavior intervention plan. There is a rubric that we do. I always take feedback on the rubric if you want to provide me with feedback. If you decide to practice score the sample that I give you and the link, and you want to give me feedback on the rubric to make it easier or better, I can still tinker with the rubric. I can't change things where I move one thing from one score to another at this point because we have too many that we've used this tape and the way it is. That I would have to throw out all my research, and I'm reluctant to do that right now. But I think we have the scoring right. I think sometimes we could do a better job in explaining it on the rubric. So you can give me feedback. That rubric will tell you whether or not the item might be a 0, a 1, or a 2. So each item of those 18 items, you're going to give it a 0, 1, or a 2. You get then 3 scaled scores. You get a percentage scores for the total FBA, the total BIP, and then the entire document. So I'm going to show you a sample of how Florida overall did. We took 151 FBA BIPs from 13 school districts in Florida. Some of this is also because we wanted to make sure that the TATE itself was a reliable and valid instrument. So we had about 25% of those 151 products scored by 2 raters that were trained by me. And this is, I know some of you are thinking, oh God, a table. I'm going to tell you just real fast that what this is telling us, if we look up the upper right-hand corner where it has the FBA, ICC, and then a 0.92, and the BIP 0.93, and a total of 0.94. What that is looking at is when we have 2 independent raters score the same FBA BIP, and then we compare their total scores, the total scores, the closer you are to 1.0, the total, the more that they're closer to perfect, which means they have the same score, higher agreement. So you can see that two people using the tape to score an FBA and a BIP independently will come to very high agreement. There's not very much, as you can see, the lower and the upper, we don't have that much variation. So we know this is a very reliable instrument, which is great. The individual items now, that's what's interesting. Those are the two rows that you see down at the bottom, and those are the 18 items. Those are all kappa coefficients, which range from a low of number 18, which is the fidelity question. We didn't have any FBAs, maybe about 3 or 4 that mentioned the word fidelity in their BIP, so maybe they got something. But I think there was too much agreement, so I don't know how that could happen, and I'm not a statistician, so I can't explain that, but that was our lowest one. We don't have, we keep it in there anyways because we want to do fidelity to a high of 0.98 on item 10 in the BIP. And then we have probably a mean of around low 80s, upper 70s, I would say, for the other items. So some items are easy to get inter-rater agreement. Some are a little bit harder. You'll notice number 2, when we go through the scale, you're kind of going to probably see why some of them are just a little bit tougher for people to come to agreement on. We also did what's called convergent validity, where we wanted to see whether or not did we get the right, what sometimes is called the construct. So does the tape actually and truly measure what it says it's going to measure, the quality of an FBA BIP? So we use Cook's and Diane Browning Wright's Behavior Support Plan Quality Evaluation Guide. You can download that for free from the internet if you really want to see it. It's much longer than the tape, and it is very specific to the project that developed it, their FBA BIP training that they do. We trained 2 people to do this, and they scored 30 FBAs with both the TATE and the BSPQE. So the results are, you're going to look here at the yellow shaded ones. Again, this is a little bit lower than what you saw with the reliability of the TATE. So we're coming up with about the TATE overall mean score compared with the BSPQE mean score is at 0.42. Now that is actually considered a large effect size. One of the reasons we think that we might not be having high agreement is because the BSPQE doesn't evaluate the FBA part. So that's why you see where the FBA mean score, we don't even have any significance there. They don't really look at the FBA. And then the total BIP mean score, because the BSPQE does look only at the behavior intervention plan, we got a little bit of higher agreement. We do have reasons. If you want to really know, just ask me. But I think it's because their instrument is so specific to their own FBA and BIP. It's not generalizable to other FBA BIPs. That there were some differences in how they looked at whether or not the BIP had quality. But our statistician said this is okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say that's fine. Here's what we have gotten from Florida. So of those 100 plus FBA BIPs that we looked at, the overall functional behavior assessment percentage mean score that we're getting is 52%. That's only a little over half of the components. That means that most of the school districts are hitting with their FBA. And the BIP is lower, 41%, with a total score of 47%. So we don't have cutoff scores, just to let you know, because we don't have enough diversity. We have too many FBA BIPs that are scoring kind of in the low area and only a few that score in the upper ends. I think one of our highest ones might be in the 70%, and we only have a few of those, so we can't get a cutoff score yet. However, I would venture to say that anything 50% or below is probably not technically adequate, just common sense. We're not going to go over all of these other than to say these are the different items. And then if you do your own, you're going to be able to create tables and graphs and all sorts of things like these. But these now, you want to see mean scores between 0 and 2. So closer the mean scores are to 2, that means the more adequate that area is. And these are taking each of the 9 items in the FBA BIP. And if you look at this one, setting events, like if this was your district and you evaluated, let's say, 10 FBA BIPs throughout your district, you would see, okay, setting events. Our district's not doing well on setting events. Our state actually was not doing well on setting events. We can discuss that sometime later, but we don't have enough time to discuss why right now. Antecedents, when there's no problem behavior. Some of that is a form issue. A lot of forms do not even ask for that. And that's important because it helps us figure out why the trigger that predicts problem behavior might be a trigger. And then consequences is another one that would tell us we're not doing that well. That's an area of improvement. One of the reasons is, again, many of the forms were developed to only ask under consequences what was the function. The consequences actually are the exact responses that adults or peers or both make after problem behavior occurs. So we want to see that the teacher reprimand, redirect, the peers laugh. That's what we're looking for consequences. And based on the consequences and the triggers, you then can come up with a function. Okay, and these are the BIP scores, the individual 9 items. And you can see on those, outside of 10 and 11, Florida as a state has a lot of work to do. So at least it's not just your district that has some work to do with replacement behaviors and being more precise in the describing them. You can see that everything from 12 to 15 are your primary or core intervention strategies, prevent strategies or antecedent, teaching the replacement behavior and reinforcing that replacement behavior, and responding to problem behavior. Those are all below 1 and closer to 0. So all of those need help. Crisis plan or safety plan also was low, wasn't well described. And then look at progress monitoring, and then there's the fidelity one. Very few even talk about fidelity. So what we're going to do is go over the technical adequacy evaluation tool. I'm going to go over it pretty quickly so that we can get into, now what do I have to do to share?
I can.
Oh, she's going to share. Okay, so we're going to share my document with you guys. I forgot we're not sharing yet. There it is. That's
right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Might take just a second for it to load up.
The rubric is more detailed, and when I do a more extensive training, we go a little bit more over the rubric. Currently sharing. It says I'm sharing it. Currently sharing.
Let's see. Yep, there it is. Just took a second.
Okay, great. Yeah. And hopefully you all have it. So if I can minimize this, right? Mm-hmm. So I can make this a little bigger just in case. Okay, if you want it bigger, hopefully Betsy can see if you put in the chat, I need it bigger. Okay. The first item, so we're just going to go over these fairly quickly so we can get in a couple of practice scoring, and we can have time for you guys to ask any questions. So the first one's going to look at that collaboration, which we said was an important point. We want to be able to see whether or not this FBA that we're looking at has any evidence in which the FBA had more than one source. So by source, we mean either more than one person providing information or more than one kind of FBA technique was used. So maybe an example would be doing an interview and an observation, or doing 2 interviews, one with the family, one with the student, doing an observation and then a rating scale. So we're just trying to find out if there's anything in which we can say, okay, there at least was more than one person who provided input into this. The second one, number 2, is now looking at whether or not we have identified and defined the problem behavior. When you look at the rubric is going to give you some notes and hints on what to look. And one of the things is you may have to look at the hypothesis on your FBA to make sure that the problem behavior they identified as the concern is also the problem behavior that they put in the hypothesis. Believe it or not, it changes sometimes, and there's no explanation how usually most forms have something like the target behavior of concern. Don't see anything as how did the behavior of concern that got started on this part then change into this on the hypothesis. So you want to make sure those are the same. And the definition for it doesn't have to be as a behavior analysis would define it with such preciseness. But we have to be able to agree that if we went into the classroom, we would all agree that we would recognize when that behavior started and when that behavior ended. I usually say it describes the physical movements we would see a student do, or the auditory things that come out of a student's mouth. Those are the kind of things we want to look at for the definition. Number 3, we're looking at whether or not they're reporting how is this behavior being performed by the student. What is the baseline data that we have that show this is actually a problem for us? And these are the 4 components we're going to want to see in order for that item to get a 2. One of the things that we see that seems to happen with a lot of FBAs is that time frame. Behavior, another thing about the efficiency and effectiveness thing, was one thing you may walk away from today. The other thing is behavior is contextual. Behavior isn't like an IQ score. You can't rely on baseline data you took over a year ago to be the same, because behavior changes based on the context. And some behaviors that are problems in some contexts are not behaviors in other contexts. For example, screaming is okay when you're playing a football game, right? But screaming is not okay when everybody's working on an independent work assignment and this person's screaming because they don't want to do the work and disrupting everything. So we're going to say in that rubric is the baseline data have to describe over what dates, and those dates should be within 30 days of this FBA. And before the FBA, collected before this FBA was completed, so that we know that it is pretty much within this context. Number 4, we're looking for setting events now. Now, not every student has a setting event, and we don't have enough time to go into what a setting event is. If you recall on that one slide, this is an area that we get continual low scores, and mostly it's because people don't understand what is a setting event. It is what we sometimes call a distal trigger. It's something that isn't there every single day, so it is not the setting. I know that people like to say it is the setting because it's called a setting event, but it's not. The classroom, the hallway, those are locations. That's where behavior happens. But a setting event is something that happens usually removed in time from when you actually see the behavior. But when the days that setting event is in place, you're going to see an impact on the behavior. Sometimes the only time this behavior happens is when the setting event is in place. For example, a student who doesn't get enough sleep the night before, maybe on those days, that's the only day you're going to see the screaming behavior. For high school students, when they have a fight with their girlfriend, those are the days you're going to see more non-compliance, more arguing with the teacher. So you're going to be looking for things that don't happen every single day, but happen removed in time. And when they're in place, you see a pattern that affects that behavior. So not every student has a setting event. So to get a 2, you have to identify the setting event and establish the pattern, how it's contingent on the impact of the behavior. Or you would need to say we considered setting events and there are none. That's the only way we know how to score that, when there's no setting event. Antecedent events is number 5. Now we're going to look and see whether or not this FBA actually identified the triggers or the immediate conditions that occur that the behavior happens right after the antecedent is done. So real typical ones that you all know are, we present the student with a demand to do a non-preferred task that involves writing, would be an example of an antecedent event that would get a 2. It not only identifies the event, but gives a little bit more detail, a non-preferred writing assignment demand, as opposed to if it just said teacher demand, we'll consider that as an antecedent, but that would only get a score of 1 because they don't have enough detail. Number 6 is, now that's the one, is we're looking for whether or not the FBA identifies what are the events that are happening in which there is no problem behavior present. So something like when the student does interactive tasks that involve physical activity or non-academic work, we don't see the problem behavior. That would get a 2. If they just said something like PE, that would get them a 1. They at least identified something, but we don't know what it is about PE that is more likely to enhance appropriate behavior and not have problem behavior happen. So the more detail, the better adequacy, better information we have. Number 7, we're looking for the consequences. And as I explained before, we want the actual responses made by others and enough detail that we understand it. And number 8, now we're looking for the summation or the hypothesis. Was the hypothesis written? And if it was, did it use the information from 4 if there was a setting event in 5, 6, and 7? Can we go and do a mapping back to all of those and see where they got this information in the hypothesis? So we want to see, do they have these components and is it linked back to the information? And then number 9, we want to make sure that we're not using some of these strange functions, which sometimes is power, control. I've seen some, he has autism. That was the function of the behavior. We get a lot of interesting things in some of the stuff that we look at. I'm sure some of you have seen a few that you have said, oh my gosh, we have to do more training. We want to make sure that it is either it's trying to obtain, get, or trying to avoid, terminate, delay, or it could be a combination of those two. Okay, those are the FBA. We're going over real fast. The BIP, number 10 is usually 2 for most districts. We want to make sure that this behavior intervention plan was done quickly after the FBA information was collected. Because remember, behavioral is contextual. If we wait too long, things might have changed. We no longer have accurate information. And because most school districts have forms that are continuous forms and are done all on the same day in the same meeting, they almost all get a 2 on this. Hypothesis developed from the FBAs included a reference on the behavior plan. Again, because most school districts have forms that are continuous, they're going to get an automatic 2 if it's the form and it was all done on the same day. They don't have to put the hypothesis in 2 different places because we're going to assume that, well, they're including it on their document, they're going to use that hypothesis. It's a big inference, but we're going to go with that. Now, number 12, 13, 14, and 15, we're looking for strategies linked to the hypothesis. I'm going to explain number 12, and 13, 14, 15 are exactly the same explanation. So this one, number 12, is now we're going to look to see if they selected a strategy in their behavior intervention plan that directly modifies one of the triggers in the when in their hypothesis, the antecedent part. Does this intervention actually stand a chance of directly modifying that antecedent? So that's the first thing. Is it actually a prevent intervention, and is it linked to that antecedent that it could impact it? And then the second part of it is, did they describe that intervention in enough detail that you could go in and do that intervention with that student? We like to say task analysis, but it doesn't have to be a task analysis. It just has to be enough of a description so that a teacher or any adult or a peer even could go and do that intervention. So to get a 2, you have to not only have a link to the hypothesis, you also have to have a detail of how to do the strategy. And that 13, 14, and 15 are all following the same pattern. 16, is there a need for a safety plan considered? So not all students, of course, need a safety plan. However, we're unable to tell by the problem behavior whether or not there are other behaviors. So we do suggest to people that they at least put something down saying the behavior is not harmful and therefore there was no need for a safety plan. If they do have a safety plan, we want to make sure, again, there's enough detail that we know exactly what we're doing. And then number 17 looks for, do we have a follow-up plan for collecting evaluation data? And to get a 2, we want these components to be on it. When are we going to do the data collection? How often? Who is going to do the data collection? How is that data going to be collected? And when are we going to review it? A specific plan, then the final one, is for collecting fidelity data. When and how often will fidelity be collected? Who's going to do it? It could be a self-assessment by the teacher. If so, method could be a self-assessment checklist and then a review date. When you do this, you're going to just count up all of your points and you're going to get raw scores. Whoops, what is this? What am I doing with the mouse? Sorry, I hope I didn't make anybody like have a little seizure there or something. We try again, getting it to roll down the entire way.
Are you trying to make it go down?
Down, yeah. I was doing so well before. There it is. Aha, got it. Okay, so you're going to get the raw score, and then there you have the score possible, and you just divide the score you got by the possible score, and you'll get your percentage between 0 and 100%. Before we go on to Bart Simpson's example, and have you practice scoring this?
You want me to get you there?
Yeah.
You got it.
She will. I'll get me there. Are there any big questions yet? We might not do all of the ones that I had listed because I see it's already 3:18. What happened to the PowerPoint?
Oops.
Okay.
There we go.
I think this is where we want.
Okay.
Questions, first of all, from anybody. I'm going to check and make sure. Okay, practice time. Here we're on the right place.
No, I think you're good.
Okay, so what I want you to do is it's called FBA Tate example, I think is the document. It's the last document up
Sample
here. Sample one.
FBA.
Yeah. If you guys could all bring that up, if you haven't already, download that. We're going to practice scoring. I was going to practice 3 items. We'll see how far we get. And then we'll talk about it. So we're going to do the first one. We're going to do question 2 on the FBA BIP Tate. Question 2 is the one, problem behaviors are identified and operationally defined. If more than one behavior is identified, it's clear which behavior will be the focus of the FBA. And we have the option of doing 0, 1, or 2. Now, what I did on this slide is at the bottom, just in case you couldn't find it on Bart, I have down here underneath the 2, I put the exact response on the FBA BIP that you have for Bart Simpson, where it says step 1 on there, problem identification, because they did it. So there are good things about what this district did actually with this FBA BIP form. So don't think that we're always highly critical. I can always see, these are good things the district's trying to do. It's just we have to make sure people understand who are completing and doing this FBA BIP what to put here. So they put for the target behavior for step 1 was a problem identification, problem solving processes. They called the behavior failure to complete and turn in assignments. And this is their definition. When writing, Bart starts an assignment and may write 2 sentences, then will stare off into space for several seconds, whisper to peers sitting nearby, and rarely finishes and turns in completed work. So that's the end of their target behavior that we would look at to score for this question 2. Don't worry about the missing 15 assignments one. That would be for number 3. We're not going to do number 3 today. We're only going to do number 2. So look at your Tate rubric. Look at your Tate scoring, and we have a poll, I think, for you guys to put in your response. Question 1.
But it's still.
Oh, that's okay. It's question 2. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Just make sure you can
Yeah,
see.
I knew I had 4, so I must have taken 1 out. Okay, so what we want you to do is, and we won't know who is doing what, so it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. You're just practicing right now using this. Look at the rubric and tell me if you would give that a 0, a 1, or a 2. And then we're going to see if you agree with Kathy Christensen and my score when we develop this. I do have to tell you, Kathy and I did not always agree. So it would depend on who had the best argument at times. So this is not quite black and white. It's not always going to be a slam dunk that it's going to be clear what it is. So do not feel bad if you're debating between 2 scores or 3 scores. Okay. Okay, so we have 4 people who said they would give it a 1 and 3 who would give it a 2. You guys did really well because it is between a 1 and a 2. We definitely know it's not a 0. Kathy and I gave it a 2. What I'm going to do is once you score the whole thing and you do we'll end it with the link. I will send you the master and send you an adequate version of Bart Simpson's FBA BIP. The reason that we gave it a 2 is when we look at the rubric, the reason that sometimes people want to give it a 1 is because they called it a very bad name. Failure to complete and turn in assignments. That really doesn't describe anything. It talks more about a product as opposed to behavior. But in their definition, they describe behaviors that we could actually see the student doing. We could see Bart start writing an assignment, write 2 sentences. I could observe him doing that. I could observe him staring for several seconds. I could observe him whispering to peers. Rarely finishes. If I were their facilitator, I might work on that a little more, but I could definitely get up to that point, a good observation and understand when that behavior happens and not happens. And that's the reason we gave it a 2. However, those of you that scored it a 1, be aware that about half of the people that we work with would still give it a 1. So again, in the Bart Simpson adequate version, we improve upon this definition to show you what a real 2 would look like. So you'll be able to get that. Okay, we're going to do one more, only one more, not all 3, just one more. So let's see. Yeah, we'll try this one. The other one's the behavior intervention one, but this is sometimes always interesting. Question 5, the antecedent event. So we're looking for the triggers that come before this failure to complete work. What would you give it, a 0, 1, or a 2? So look at your rubric, question 5. If you look at step 2, problem analysis and Bart Simpson's form, that is their entire, I got to tell you, that is their entire FBA right there. They identify the high probability, the triggers are when he does writing, independent work in English and science. Behavior has a low probability of occurring in PE. That would help you answer the next question. So don't even think about that part of it. Now, the next part says behavior most often occurs after an adult prompts Bart to do his work. So now go ahead and say whether you think it's a 0, 1, or a 2.
And I think we're going to go ahead and just type it into the chat box.
Okay, yeah, it'll be faster.
So a 0, 1, or a 2 for this one.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I think it's Anna.
Mm-hmm. Got another 2 and a 2. Lots of 2s.
You guys must be looking at the rubric. I love it. Yeah, Kathy and I gave it a 2, which often angers people who give it a 1 because they don't like it. And I can see you could be a little cleaner on this. However, what I always tell people as a hint is look at the examples that we list for 2s and the examples that we list for 1s on the rubric. This is so close to an actual example on the rubric for a 2, which is prompted by an adult to work. And so that's why it's given a 2. Now, maybe if we redid the rubric now, might be a little meaner and tougher about it. But, we're not looking for, let's say, the A+ version of an FBA BIP. We're looking for what is the minimum that we could do for this component that would still make it technically adequate, which also is more feasible for schools. So we're not going to have time to do the next scoring. Here is what we're going to end with. I was going to do one of the intervention ones, but we're going to go ahead. If you would like to do all of Bart Simpson and get a lot of good stuff back, I have given you a link on this PowerPoint, which takes you to a Qualtrics survey, which is really the whole Bart Simpson FBA BIP, the TATE. Go ahead and put in your scores. Once you have completed, you can let me know, although I would know Qualtrics doesn't tell me you've done it, so you'll have to email me. I didn't set it up to contact me. Once I get it, that you've completed it, I'm going to send you the answers, which is the master key, and I'm also going to give you Bart Simpson's FBA BIP made technically adequate. And you actually only have 2 of the answers. 2 of the 18, you already have 2. We're going to end it if you have any questions in 1 minute. Do you like the tape, the little bit you got to use in practice? Is there something you don't like about it, or you think it's difficult? And what might you want or need in order to use the tape in your setting?
We've got Lisa typing. And Lisa, while you type, we do have one more very short survey for you at the end, so stick around for just a minute.
Okay. Thank you. You like the tool? Oh, good. You already have something. So, yeah, you might have something better than the tape for all we know. But if it's a checklist, and this actually gives scores, so it's a little bit different. It has a little range there that can let you know where you may need to go to do some professional development or coaching. So thank you. Yeah. And again, one of the things is that we can, as a project, provide you with tape training in your districts if you like. It's part of what we offer through the PBIS project. So like, for example, if you want to evaluate the adequacy of your FBA BIPs and you want to have a training like maybe with your staff who do FBA BIPs to know what are the essential components, this might be a training that will be useful to your district. So think about if that's something you want, talk to your TA from the project and request the training. If you want to learn how to do it with just a few people and you want to learn a little bit more about to make sure you're doing you're doing it correctly and you want to get some inter-rater agreement, we'd be happy to help you with that as well.
And Gina in Pasco says that they actually use the tape.
I know, I scored. I trained you guys several years ago, but probably I don't know if anyone I trained is still in the district. Did I train you, Gina? Or did somebody in the district train you? Great. Hi, Lee. Someone in the district. Good. Well, I'm glad that's exactly how this is supposed to work, increasing capacity in the districts. Thank all of you. If you have any other questions, you have my email address on the first slide, and you can always look for it. And then you can go ahead and email me. And again, once you finish the survey, you can email me. And I really won't confirm. So if some of you go, I really want to see the answers, and I want that Bart Simpson technically adequate version, you can lie and tell me you did it. I won't know the difference.
And so this is the last poll of the day. Just wanted to see how helpful today's chat was. And we appreciate very much that you guys came along with us and provided so much good feedback. And thank you for...